Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Teach Big Podcast. I'm your host, Randi Whitney, and I am so thankful and happy that you are here today. We'll be discussing one of my favorite topics ever. Oh, but wait, before we do that, do you notice anything new behind me? That's right. Some new curtains. So we started off with the gray because I love the grays, but then honestly, we just didn't pop enough. You know, you have to have the pop. So we've changed to a black curtain background. And so hopefully you love it so much. All right. So the other thing is that, do you notice like on this curtain right over here, there's the bright light coming in? And as much as I love some bright light, we also have some curtains ordered that is going to prevent that from in the future too. So we just keep getting better and better as we go along. And by the way, if you have any suggestions, we would love for you to comment and let us know. And we'd of course love to hear all your favorite things. So please comment your favorite thing about this podcast as well. So before further ado, today's episode is one that I've been so excited to share with you for such a long time. And in fact, I've been sharing it with teachers for a very long time, probably for the last 20 or so years. Sometimes I didn't necessarily call it full circle, but I've always had a passion for what I now call the full circle of language arts. So we're diving into the heart of it. But before we can dive in, we need to get prepared and know, where was the full circle born from and where does it fit in to the Teach Big philosophy? The Teach Big philosophy is that we help every teacher become an expert in content, craft, and complements. And that doesn't just end there. It's that we help them become experts in their content, craft, and complements so that the cognition and confidence grow. That is so important along the way. And now let's talk about all of these things: content, craft, and complements. See, content is what in the world we should be teaching. Craft is how do we teach it? What's our delivery like? And then we also have complements. That's the connection we're making with kids. And the neat thing is I have a book that explains all three of these components of our mission statement. And those books are called Full Circle of Language Arts for Content. And then for craft, we have Beyond the Script. And then for complements, we have From Posters to Passion. So if you haven't grabbed yours yet, definitely head over to Amazon and you can get those books as well. But let's say one more time, what are those three components? Content, craft, and complements. All right, now let's dive in. Let me start with a very bold statement. Every time we teach language arts, we either are preventing learning gaps, we're allowing learning gaps, or we're closing learning gaps that someone else allowed. Let's say that again. We're preventing learning gaps, we're allowing learning gaps, or we're closing learning gaps that somebody else allowed. We do not get to remain neutral. We are either reinforcing understanding or we are unknowingly letting cracks form in the foundation. And those cracks turn into gaps, and those gaps turn into struggles, and those struggles, they turn into kids who believe that they are not readers or writers. But here's the good news. When you understand the full picture of what students need in reading and writing, you can stop those gaps before they ever begin. You're in the business of prevention. What's the Full Circle of Language Arts all about anyway? It's not a specific program. It's not a certain script to follow. It's not a boxed curriculum, but rather it is a framework, a way of thinking. It's building habits, not strategies. Let's talk about habits versus strategies. Habits are forever. Strategies are for the temporary. We teach strategies as teachers a lot of times to help our kids get through a particular type of learning or a particular moment, or maybe even just get through this test. Here's a strategy. But then after that test is over, after that moment in time is over, the strategy is all but forgotten. But habits, they remain forever. They become a part of who we are. They are our schema for something. Building habits reduce the cognitive load. And that is so important. That also will be a podcast of its own, probably a few podcasts, just to determine and talk about what in the world happens with cognitive load. Cognitive load, simply put, is how many things are we balancing all at once to answer a single question. And there's all types of cognitive load. We'll get into those in a future podcast, but suffice it to say that the more habits we are building, the less cognitive load that is needed to answer any given question that habit supports. It is a complete interconnected explanation of what needs to be taught in order for students to read and write with purpose and success. Let's break down the full circle of language arts. It has 6 slices. So think of 6 different components that every student needs in order to understand and read and write with expertise. They need phonics, of course, and then grammar. How do we put all that phonics together? And then vocabulary, that deeper meaning, and then fluency, the forgotten slice of the full circle. And then comprehension for reading, of course, and then writing. Now, 4 of the slices of the full circle are what we call the habits. The first 4, phonics, grammar, vocabulary, and fluency. The second 2 are the application of those habits. In other words, we need those habits to be built. We need those schemas to be built in order to apply that knowledge. So often I hear teachers talk to each other and even ask me, how do you teach reading comprehension? Well, reading comprehension itself is not a single lesson of any classroom, in any school, in any district, anywhere. But reading comprehension is a conglomeration of a bunch of habits coming together so systematically, so automatically that comprehension is allowed to take place. If we're wondering, how do I say this word? Or what does this word mean? I'll just skip it. By the way, please don't be teaching, skip it. But what is reading comprehension if we have gaps in the habits? In the habits of what? In the phonics habit, in the grammar habit, in the vocabulary habit, in the fluency habit. If we have gaps in those, then what suffers is reading comprehension. And then, of course, the 6th slice of the full circle, which is written constructed response. So once we have gaps, and they're little gaps that become bigger gaps and bigger gaps over the year, then what happens is reading comprehension and written constructed response suffer greatly. So let's start with phonics. Now, don't make the mistake that thinking phonics is only for the primary grades. Phonics is for every student everywhere. And why? Well, because phonics isn't just about matching letters to sounds. It's about decoding and encoding. It's about syllable patterns, morphemes, structural analysis, and understanding how language works at the word level. It is in the full circle model how we break down phonics into 4 quadrants that apply to every learner. By the way, the 4 quadrants of phonics, whole entire podcast of its own. But from early readers to struggling upper grade readers, phonics is important. Now, for the upper grades, we wouldn't necessarily always call it phonics and things like that. We would make sure that we're matching their maturity level with right where they are in the phonics level. So we don't want to show them, little baby cartoons and, what letter is this? That would not make them feel very validated in their age. However, we do want to make sure that we're not continuing to allow those gaps if they happen to exist when the student comes to us. So maybe instead of calling it phonics, we could call it, when they come over to a small group, perhaps in our classroom, we call it, come on over to the language lab. That might sound cool because they like labs and it sounds like a science lab. So you put on your thinking cap as far as how can we make teaching the early developmental phonics to the older student. And you bet there's a podcast for that. But the quadrants remain the same. The first quadrant of phonics has to do with letter recognition and letter sounds of our baseline sounds. Using those baseline sounds, a lot of times letters can be put together. That takes us to the second quadrant. The second quadrant is all about blends and a few other things. And then the third quadrant, very generally speaking, is about digraphs. That's where we have two letters that no longer make their two separate sounds, but together they make one sound. Sometimes that one sound is a baseline sound that we learned in quadrant 1. Sometimes that baseline sound doesn't exist within the digraph, but rather the two letters, when put together, make their own new fresh sound. Because did you know there are 26 letters in our alphabet? And those 26 letters, used and combined in various ways, create 44 sounds in the English language. And did you know there are 75 ways to make those 44 sounds that are made up of the 26 letters? So there's a lot to learn in phonics. So much of this needs to become habitual, or we have phonics gaps. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to the 5-year-old, but we're also paying attention to the 5th grader, because more and more teachers are telling me in all of my seminars all the time, Randi, this information is great. And did you know that only half of my kids can really read? Do you have anything for that? And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're teaching 6th grade and you're saying that truly for reading comprehension purposes, only half of your kids can really read. So there's a lot more discussion to be had there, but we need to make sure that we are, of course, addressing the early readers, but we're also addressing the struggling upper readers. And once we see these quadrants, we'll never look at spelling or decoding the same way again. The 4th quadrant are your vowel teams. Vowels are hard. They make all kinds of sounds, so many variations, but it is completely decodable. Did you know that 93% of the English language is actually decodable by a rule? I like to call it the Gen rule. But enough about phonics. I could talk all day about phonics. So for the second slice of the full circle, we have grammar. Grammar is not meant to be a worksheet that you dread or a red pen rule book. It's a beautiful logistical system that gives students power, the power to craft sentences with meaning, clarity, and voice. In the full circle framework, grammar is not taught in isolation. It is tied directly to writing, to vocabulary, and to comprehension. When students know how sentences work and how they work together, they understand what they read and they like writing even, and they write like they mean it. So understanding grammar is not just about nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs. It's not isolated teaching parts of speech. We do have to isolate in the fact when we teach something new, we teach the brand new piece, but then we plug that piece into the bigger puzzle. And that is where grammar is so important. So let's move on now to the third slice, or the third habit of the full circle of language arts, and that is vocabulary. Sometimes you'll hear me call that lexicon because I like doing plays on words, and lexicon is another word for vocabulary. So vocabulary by definition is the bridge between decoding and understanding. If phonics is how you pronounce the word, vocabulary is how you apply it. And I don't mean teaching long word list. I mean teaching morphology, context clues, shades of meaning, and academic vocabulary in ways that matter to students. When students know how to build and break down words, they start recognizing patterns everywhere. Patterns are key. Okay, so now to the final habit Oh, and don't you worry, I will be talking a lot of podcasts about vocabulary. I have so many books that I've written on vocabulary, and I have such a super big heart for vocabulary. But this is about the full circle in general. So now let's move on to fluency. That is our fourth habit in the full circle. Fluency is not just speed. It's phrasing, expression, accuracy, rhythm. It's reading like, well, a reader. And when fluency is taught intentionally, it's connected to phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. It becomes the heartbeat of reading. It is also the most undertaught of all four of the habits. In the full circle, fluency is not an afterthought, but rather it's a crucial skills with real techniques behind it. So let's review before we go into the application of the four habits. Habit number 1 is phonics. Habit number 2 is grammar. Habit number 3 is vocabulary. Habit number 4 is fluency. Now let's apply all of those habits. Let's apply it first to reading comprehension. Reading comprehension is where it all comes together. It's the application of all the habits that came before it. But here's the problem. Too often we expect students to comprehend without ever giving them the tools to do so. That's why I created the 4 dimensions of comprehension. Wait, what? So simply put, think about DOK or depths of knowledge in math and in science. I tried really hard to plug in language arts into DOK, but I felt like I was doing something that was forceful and it didn't really flow. And I've learned through my life that the more I force something, the more it's probably not the best plan. So as I analyze release tests and questions, there's actually a DOK or depths of knowledge for language arts and social studies, but I call it the 4 dimensions of comprehension. Those dimensions have to do with the following things, and they all begin with the letter T. They are what you've been taught, what you can tap, what you must think, and what you can toggle. Now, basically, that just means knowledge and recall, first dimension. Second dimension is show me the evidence here, people. What can you tap in that passage? And then third dimension is your gotta use your thinker. That is all the inferencing skills, the significance skills. And then fourth dimension is where we have to toggle 2 things. That's where we take a standard, something like, how does the setting influence the plot? Well, we've got setting and we've got plot. And so kids write about setting, they write about plot. But if they did not address the verb in between, which was the influence of the setting on the plot, well, then we do have a distinct issue, right? We have not answered that question. We may have scurried all around it and addressed the nouns, but we did not address the verb, which was write about the influence. So if we're not writing about the influence of the setting on the plot, we have not, in fact, toggled. So this does account for a lot of students getting reading comprehension questions incorrect, as well as missing prompts in the written constructed response piece of the puzzle. So, and like I said, there'll be a podcast for that too. But this is how we teach students to understand, not just to recall, but rather to reason. So reading comprehension is pulling together all 4 of these habits. And once they become schemas, once they become habitual, then they don't weigh so heavily on the cognitive load, but rather they're habits. So they don't weigh on us at all. These are the things that we can apply so quickly. Now, we can apply them in reading, but we can also apply them in writing. Did you know that writing is the mirror of our reading? What students can do with language on paper reflects what they can understand about language in their minds. Writing is not just a subject. It is the application of all 5 of the other slices. phonics, grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and even reading comprehension are all necessary to become excellent writers. This is why in the full circle, the writing is woven into every layer and needs every layer to be successful. When students write about what they read, when they apply grammar with intention, when they use vocabulary with voice, then you know they're not just learning something, they're mastering it. They're becoming experts. So now, think about this. As a teacher, if you do not know all of these slices through and through, whether you're teaching the younger grades or the older grades, how can you put it into your craft and share it with your students? Many of you are reading scripts to teach your kids. These are not bad things, but how do we make sure that we can answer the questions that go beyond the script? That's a whole nother book. It's a whole nother podcast as well. But beyond the script is how we address our craft. Our craft should not be simply reading a script, but living out that lesson. That's the craft of it. And how do we possibly do that without being experts in our content area? So I encourage you to become a true expert in all of your content areas, even if they're not language arts, whatever you're out there teaching, become a true expert in it. But remember, true experts don't know everything. They just have the passion of the pursuit. Remember in previous broadcasts where we talked about Miss Corbett, and I was upset that I had made a 97 on something. She said, it's okay. You don't need to know everything. You just have to have the passion to pursue it. And so I encourage you to become an expert today in all the slices of the full circle of language arts. But now imagine teaching just one of those slices in isolation. It's like trying to teach a student how to drive, but only giving them the steering wheel. You need the full vehicle. You need the whole circle. When you understand how each slice fits together, how they build upon each other, support each other, and reinforce one another, you stop wondering where to focus. You stop guessing when you teach, and you start teaching with confidence and clarity. That is the full circle of language arts. It is content. It is expertise. It is the end of accidental gaps. So if you've ever felt like you were assigning more than you were teaching, or if you've ever looked at a student's response and thought, they didn't get it, and I don't know why. If you've ever wished someone would just tell you what content you needed to know and how it all fits together, this is your moment. Because teaching is not about perfection, but it is about the pursuit. And experts, they're not the ones who know it all, remember. They're the ones who keep showing up, committed to finding it all. You're not just turning pages, you're turning a corner in your teaching. The circle starts here with you right now. That's so important because I don't think enough of us feel like true experts in our content area. So if it's language arts where you want to feel more like an expert, then hey, I'm your girl. I'd love to help you out. But maybe it's math, maybe it's science, maybe it's social studies, maybe it's one of the fine arts. Regardless of what it is, I challenge you to have the pursuit of the passion to go out and learn everything you can about your content area. Because the more you know, the more they will know, because you can't wait to share what you know. Have you ever learned something new and you thought, oh, I can't wait to go home and tell my mom, or, oh, I can't wait to go home and tell my husband, or, oh, I can't wait to get to school tomorrow and tell my best friend teacher. When you know something cool, it's hard to keep it inside. So I challenge you, go out there, have the passion of the pursuit to go out there and learn something cool. Learn so much that it's just spilling over and you cannot wait to share it with your students. That is the pursuit of the passion for your content area. So the overall message here today is know your content. That is prong number 1 of the Teach Big mission statement, which is helping teachers become experts in their content, craft, and complement so that confidence and cognition can soar. We have an obligation to understand and know our content thoroughly. How are you searching for new knowledge? Where are you looking? Maybe it's in services. Maybe it's reading books. Maybe it's even YouTube. Whatever it is, learn more so that you want to always be excited and share more. And then if you're language arts based, it's the full circle. Remember, we need to be building habits. Our habits that must become schemas, that must become habitual, are the 4 habits before reading comprehension can happen and before we can write a single word. Those 4 habits in language arts are phonics, habit 1, grammar, habit 2, vocabulary, habit 3, fluency, habit 4. And then we can apply those habits, and then we can comprehend what we're reading. And then after we comprehend what we're reading, guess what? We can write written constructed responses. We can become experts in that. Keep in mind, knowing your content is so valuable, but it's not the only part. Stay tuned for in the future to learn how do we deliver the craft. So if this entire podcast was about the importance of knowing our content, the ins and outs of it, how do I deliver it? Coming up later. But thanks for joining me today. And if this message inspired you, share it with a colleague, or better yet, take it back in your heart, in your own classroom, and start teaching it today. Teach with your whole heart. Teach with a full whole circle. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I know that by the fact you're still here, that means you have the pursuit of the passion. Subscribe today on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and even YouTube. And until next time, think big, teach big, and believe in the greatness that is already within yourself. I'm Randi Whitney, and I appreciate you tuning in today. See you soon.